Hello, Bonjour. Welcome to Indigenizing the National Parks Yellowstone's 150th anniversary webinar. Before we get started, I just want to ask Wes Martell to share some words of encouragement or a prayer for the victims in Texas in recognition of the tragedy that happened earlier this week. Wes?
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. Thank you, Jennifer, for asking me to start us off here. You know, as we all know, there was horrific misfortune in Texas and other areas. And, you know, those of us from reservation communities, we understand how that feels sometimes. You know, the COVID took a heavy hit on a lot of our reservations and whole families were wiped out. So we just need all to take that encouragement. So thank you for asking me. Hey, on the Bisate, Kakutni. Now when Bisa E Neta Aina. Grandfather Creator, bless each and every one of us this day. Help us to have strong hearts and clear minds so we can have the strength to fight the bad things that are around us out there. Help us in our everyday lives and help our families, our children, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren to grow up to be useful and respectful, walk on a clear path. Nahosa. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wes. So again, welcome to our webinar. My name is Jennifer Fairbanks. I'm the Communications Director for Native Organizers Alliance, and we are so happy to have everyone joining us today for this great discussion. I just want to share a quick housekeeping item first. So we'll have a question and answer session at the end after all of our speakers have had a chance to speak and share their work with us. If you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So our host for the webinar today is Judith LeBlanc. Judith is a member of the Caddo tribe, as the Executive Director of Native Organizers Alliance. She leads a national training and organizing network that supports tribes, traditional societies, and grassroots community groups in urban and tribal communities. Judith is a part of a growing circle of Indian country leaders who understand the necessity for an organized, durable ecosystem of Native leaders and organizers who lead with traditional values. Judith has also worked since 2016 with the Braveheart Society, which is a traditional Dakota women's society, and the Yankton Sioux tribe on a project to reestablish the tribe's inherent rights to co-management of the Missouri River Bottle region. Judith is also a board member of Native and a chair of the board of NDN Collective. And she is also a 2019 Roddenberry Fellow. Our first guest speaker today is Wes Martell. Wes served on the Eastern Shoshone Business Council for 20 years, where he oversaw programs and legislation dealing in water, taxation, energy, and the environment. He was chairman of the Fish and Game Committee for the Shoshone and Arapaho tribes, where they instituted sound fisheries and wildlife management planning with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and also adopted a tribal game code. His work included developing a severance tax program for the tribes and drafting, approving, and adoption of the Wind River Water Code. Wes is a veteran and has a deep and abiding respect for the values and beliefs of Indigenous people. Next is Dr. Shane Doyle, an enrolled member of the Crow tribe. Shane is passionate about his homeland, combining his own experiences growing up on a reservation with his interests in history, archaeology, education, and contemporary issues. Shane's personal and academic pursuits have merged to make him a powerful storyteller with unique insight into the powers that have shaped our communities. Shane works extensively with Indigenous groups both inside and outside of North America, and has gained interesting insights into the commonalities of tribal cultures. Shane holds a MA in Native American Studies and completed a postdoctoral appointment at the University of Copenhagen, Denmark in 2016. With 20 years of teaching experience, Shane is currently a cultural and educational consultant. And we also have Jason Valdez joining us today. Jason received his undergraduate and graduate degrees in land resources and environmental sciences from Montana State University, where he focused on tribal bison restoration. Currently, in his capacity as Tribal Buffalo Program Manager for the National Wildlife Federation's Tribal Partnership Program, he established resolution-based agreements and has helped to restore over 100 conservation buffalo to the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes on the Wind River Reservation since 2016. Jason sits on the Board of Directors for the Intertribal Buffalo Council, the Board of Trustees for the Conservation Lands Foundation, and the Environmental Commission of the Congress of Nations and States. He is the Executive Director of the Wind River Tribal Buffalo Initiative and Adjunct Professor at Central Wyoming College and Wind River Tribal College. Jason is a member of the Eastern Shoshone Tribe, and manages the tribe's growing herd of 70 buffalo. So thank you again all for joining us, and I will now turn it over to Judith.
Well, I'm really happy and excited to be together with all of you. You know, thank you, Zoom, for providing us the opportunity to have a virtual fire and to chew some fat around the fire, because it's really an amazing moment to be doing the work that you all are doing. There are so many opportunities now for us to make some really basic structural reforms happen. Basic structural reforms in how we change the nature of our relationship to land and water, and really paving the way for sovereignty and to reestablish our rightful legal, moral, and inherent role as caretakers of land and water and the national parks. There will be much info that will be shared by our speakers, and frankly, over 1,000 people RSVP'd to be here, which reflects a hunger to understand not only how we were in the past, but how we got to this point and how we walk together in order to help our descendants understand the true history and to play their roles in protecting our land, our water, our collective land, our collective water. And when we speak about national parks, they are a part of the national consciousness. But what is the missing ingredient is the indigenous role, the native role in the creation of these places, the creator's role in the creation of these places, and how we have honored those places that are now considered national treasures, and why it is that we have the right, the moral, legal, and inherent right to be a part of managing these beautiful pieces of Mother Earth. So I think there's a new level of awareness of who we are in the 21st century, but now buckle your seatbelts. You're going to get a lot of information about what we're doing and what role that you all can play, those who have joined this webinar, in ensuring that our Mother Earth is protected and brought and kept in a good way. So I will now kick it to Wes.
Thank you, Judith, for that. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm really pleased by the introduction that Judith just gave, because there are a lot of issues that we're dealing with right now that are really coming to the forefront. And right now I'm working with the Greater Yellowstone Coalition, which is an NGO. And when I was thinking about working for the coalition, I looked at their website, and the mission of the coalition is to protect the lands, waters, and wildlife of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. The Wind River Reservation here in Wyoming, we're part of that Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And the big picture of that ecosystem, when we talk about Y to Y, we're talking about Yellowstone to the Yukon. So there's a vast area of earth there that is very, very undeveloped, still has a lot of wildlife and fisheries and lands and waters that need to be protected. As I researched the work that we're doing with Yellowstone and all the tribes that have ancestral affiliation, we identified 49 tribes. And Annie, if you could please put up that map. This is a map of the 49 tribes that have a connection to Yellowstone. And as you can see, all of us up in South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, and then our relations even in Oklahoma from the Kiowa and the Comanche have ancestral affiliation to Yellowstone Park. The park is a very special place to everybody, but before 1492, it was a very sacred and special place that our people took advantage of, being able to be there and the wonderful blessings and presents that Yellowstone provides us. You know, Yellowstone's like our garden, it's like our grocery store, it's like our hospital, our pharmacy, our church, our playground. And just reading some of the stories and listening to some of our elders about how they used to visit over there and how they used to heal themselves and take advantage of all the good medicines and blessings that Yellowstone had was really an important history, not only for ourselves, but for the future. You know, the Wind River tribes are you can see on the map there in Wyoming, the brown part where the Wind River Reservation are. We're only 42 miles from the southeast corner of Yellowstone National Park. Yellowstone National Park is 2.5 million acres. The Wind River Reservation is 2.5 million acres. So I like to refer to us as the Indigenous Yellowstone. And you can see the map there. That's the reservation where you see the marker going around. And then up in the corner of Wyoming is Yellowstone National Park. The green area that you see in between there is the Shoshone National Forest. So this is a whole lot of area that is public lands. And for those of us that have been in this for quite a bit, we always say we're not for the removal of Indians, there would be no public lands. So that's really part of what we are striving for. We want to figure out how do we as Indigenous people have more involvement and inclusion in public lands. You know, for the most part, over the decades, Congress and the courts have systematically excluded us from having any involvement on our Aboriginal homeland. You know, when we're talking about re-indigenizing the parks, I think that all points to not only conservation, and you can't talk conservation without Indigenous people, but it also points to the fact that, you know, this whole area is so critical to us. And, you know, while we're really trying to impress upon the federal agents the need for them to recognize our treaty rights, our Indigenous rights, our attachment to Mother Earth and all that she provides for us. That's a real important part of helping federal agencies understand why we need to be connected to our Aboriginal homelands. But on the other side, I also believe it's really critical that tribes, we as tribal leaders and tribal governments, we clearly articulate how we want to see our Aboriginal homelands managed and taken care of. So that means as tribes, we have to have good policies regarding our homelands. We have to have good laws. We have to have standards, regulations, guidelines, all these other governance actions that give us that authority to uphold that government to government relationship we have with the United States. That government to government relationship comes by way of treaty. And that's a very important part of our being as tribal governments, is the treaty. And that, how do we breathe life into our treaty as tribal leaders and as tribal communities? How do we take back that what is important to us? You know, right now, a little bit later on, Jason's going to be talking about our efforts here for buffalo at Wind River. And that's really a powerful feeling. He'll update you on the number of buffalo we have, but just being involved with that. You know, I was able to go out, and when they brought a herd of or brought a load of 25 buffalo to Wind River here on October 11th of last year. And those big stock trailers were parked there. And while the buffalo were still inside, I walked up to that one stock trailer and I put my hand, there was a buffalo standing next to that hole in the trailer. And I put my hand on the side of that buffalo. And that was such a powerful feeling. And just, I could feel my heart in that buffalo, and I could feel that buffalo's heart in mine. And the energy and the blessing and the strength that I felt, it just humbled me. And I was so thankful that here we are, welcome home to these buffalo. You know, the colonizers and the Christians tried to eradicate us. And the way they tried to do that was eradicate the buffalo. And at one time, there was just only a few dozen buffalo left on this earth, on this country. And now we're coming back. And so that's what's really the feeling that we all feel here in Indian country. You know, we're all united behind buffalo. We all get that strength. We all feel that benefit, just like our elders did. And the way the old people talk, that buffalo is what took care of us. Everything that that buffalo provided us. We used it for our homes, our shelters, our toys, our tools, our food. And so we're really thankful for that. We're getting new life at Buffalo. Annie, can you have, I've got a few slides here, and I know Jason has a few more. These are new calves that are just born this spring. We have, that's the Wind River Range in the back. Next slide, Annie. You know, this is so good to see this. And this is at our Buffalo area and at Wind River that we have along the river. You know, we're really trying to figure out, you know, how re-indigenizing our land, you know, talks about how do we bring more buffalo to more of our land areas, you know, and we're pretty lucky here at Wind River because we have that land base to be able to do that. And so this is, you know, when our elders dealt with the buffalo, everything they did was based on the natural law of reciprocity. You take care of us, we take care of you. And that's how we feel about these buffalo. They took care of us, now we got to take care of them. And that's how we got to look at Yellowstone Park. If you're one of those people that believe money is what makes you rich, Yellowstone Park is really taking care of a lot of people. How do those people take care of Yellowstone Park? So I think in conservation, reciprocity, inclusion of bringing back indigenous conservation and management practices out in our areas around us, the mountains and the forests, that's really an important part of re-indigenizing the parks. And so I'm really thankful to be here today. I know that, you know, the work that we're working with Yellowstone National Park and a lot of federal agencies. We've got a big gathering here at Wind River next week where we're bringing in Charles Sams, a new Park Service Director, and several other federal agencies, so we can start talking about how do we connect tribes to federal agencies, how do we connect that to conservation, how do we connect that to our indigenous values and beliefs, and how do we connect that to our treaties. So I'll turn that back over to you, Judith, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Wes. You know, Yellowstone, 49 tribes have ancestral relationship to that land since the beginning of time. It's been a place of reflection, restoration, sustenance. It's been our supermarket. And clearly from the work that Wes is doing and the work that is underway there, it's clear in this moment of history, we need to weave our traditional indigenous practices and wisdom and conservation approaches with science, that in the 21st century, we must weave those things together for the good of Mother Earth. Thank you so much, Wes. Now I'm going to ask Dr. Doyle to say a few words. And I must say that Dr. Doyle comes from the Crow people. And the biggest thing that I think across Indian country, we are so appreciative of the Crows for having the biggest teepee city every year. We all yearn, if we've never been there, to go to Crow Fair and to be there in the power of seeing what a city was like in the 21st century, to see what a city, a native city, Crow City looked like back in the day. So I welcome you, Dr. Doyle.
Thank you so much. Wow, those are powerful words. And it's true. And that was part of the inspiration, I think, for what we want to do this summer in the park. And so we want to set up a teepee village there outside of Gardner. And that idea kind of came up. Well, I think, you know, a lot of people have probably had that idea over the years, but it kind of came to formation a couple years ago when the Smithsonian Magazine commissioned an article about Yellowstone's lost history. And that was the title of the article, Yellowstone's Lost History. And it was trying to refer to the native history of the park and how it's kind of been lost. And that article pretty much just looked at the archaeology. And so it was kind of focused on Douglas Mcdonald. And he's a very well-known, noteworthy archaeologist over in Missoula at the University of Montana. And so he's been looking at archaeological sites around the park for many years. And during that article, they interviewed me because I had been teaching a class about the Crow tribe in the park. And they asked me to comment on the topic. And one of the things I said was, there's not a lot of, there's nothing in the park now that really gives visitors and tourists deeper understanding of the culture that was there, who was there, when were they there, what did they do there, why was it important. And so one of the ideas I had thought of that would be fun, that might be good for everybody, is a teepee village. And so I mentioned that in the article, and then some other people read the article, and then eventually started to ask Cam Shawley, who's the superintendent, if he could help support an idea like that. And then I'm not sure how, one step led to another, but before we knew it, we at Mountain Time Arts over in Bozeman, we kind of, Cam wanted it to happen and his support staff. And so that's been our goal now for like a half a year. We've been working towards it. And so we're going to be there August 23rd, 24th, and 25th. And we'll have a number of teepees set up, at least 12, probably more. And, the goal is to have, all of the tribal communities represented. And so eventually we're going to get to that. But anyway, to kind of help commemorate, the native presence there, I've been doing some writing, and I was commissioned by the Mountain Outlaw, which is a publication out of Big Sky, Montana, to do a place name story on Yellowstone Park. So I looked at the Crow Apsalaga place names and kind of did a little article. So if you'd like to share that. So making meaning and medicine in the land of the burning ground. So I use that title, Land of the Burning Ground. That's one of the names that the Crow people have for that area. Thinking about, especially the geyser basin where the waters are all boiling, and, you have the hot water coming from the ground, and, it's the ground is on fire there. So I looked at 10 place names in the park, and I thought, there's 5 themes here that are pretty strong and apparent. And so I tried to match up the 5 themes with 2 place names per theme. So the first one was that this Yellowstone Park was a really important place for trade. And, all of the different trails that come through the park that come from the north, the east, the west, the south, and all of the other, directions, really, northeast, southeast, southwest. They all had connections, of course, to this nexus of trade that Native people had been facilitating there for a very long time, hundreds, thousands of years. And so the Nes Pierce Road, what the Crows call the Nes Pierce Road, now it's known as the Nes Pierce Trail, just shows how they understood that this was an important trade route. And that was one of my tribe's most important trade partners. And we even traded hairstyles. We ended up using the pompadour in the 1900s or 1800s, where they cut their bangs and greased them up. And so it was only the Nes Pierce and Crows who used that style, but I think that they kind of got that from one another through their trade relationship. Then thinking of Sheep-Eater Cliff, the wonderful rocks, what the Crow Indians call the wonderful rocks. They were a very important place. That was a very important place to trade. And, they traded with the sheep eaters who could make bows from bighorn sheep horns. And they understood how to soak the horns in the water to make them soft. And then they would cut them, with obsidian knives and form fit them. And then when they dried, they were pretty solid and strong compound bows. So that was another important trade item that really couldn't be found anywhere else. And then, I don't want to take up too much time, but just a few more minutes here. Obsidian Cliff. So that was one of the themes. But let me go back just a minute. That one of the themes was the trade. The other theme was the precious materials that could only be found in the park. So obsidian was one of them. Obsidian Cliff. Obsidian's been traded everywhere, all over the continent. And then the mud pots, where there is mud, the Crows call that place where there is mud, and they would use that mud to bleach their buckskin materials, whether it be lodges or clothing, and gave them a real kind of a glowing whiteness to them. This mud did. So they were collecting the mud right up to the 20th century. And then it was a ceremonial site. So going without water, there was a lot of places throughout the park where people fasted. They fasted for medicine, as we still do today. And I never realized what an important place it was until I started looking into the history there. So it's a very important ceremonial place. And then it's a site for origin stories. So there are many places in the park, geographic features that are connected to star constellations, and those stories that connect the land and the sky are also origin stories that kind of explain, the history of everything, the world, people, stars, land. And two of those places are Red Woman's Digging Stick, which is now called the Liberty Cap, and then the Dragon's Mouth, which Crow Indians called Bull. And then the last theme is the flora and the fauna. So the plants and the animals that all the native people came to the park to gather. Many medicinal plants, roots, berries, just everything. It's such a medicinal, as Wes said, it's really kind of a drugstore up there. Walmart or whatever, it's got everything in it. And then of course the animals and all of the diverse species that were there that could be hunted and gathered during when it was nice there during the summer and on the spring and fall. So thinking about the Elk River, what all tribes call it, and then what's now known today as the Hell Roaring River. Is where there are such a plethora of plants. So this data here, this piece here is going to get published this summer, and it's going to add to our knowledge of, what is happening in the park, or what happened in the park, because just last month there was a famous park historian that wrote an article called The Big Lie. And his question, or what he said was, it was a big lie that Native people really lived in the park and spent time there. He said he didn't think that was true. So this is kind of something that kind of refutes that. And then the question in the chat was, will the Teepee Village be permanent or only this August? Well, I think it's open for us. It's open to be permanent. But it's kind of up to Native people at this point. Do we really want that? Are there people who really think it's a good idea and want to come and do that at the Yellowstone Park? I guess we'll find out. It's there for us if we want it, but we also have to make it sustainable, and make it something that really shows respect and honors the Native people who come there to participate. rather than just acting like, we should jump when they say how high or whatever, it's kind of up to us. If it works for us, then we can do it. We can make it permanent, but we have to kind of take a wait and see approach.
Thank you so much, Dr. Doyle. Making meaning and medicine, giving all the visitors to Yellowstone the true history of Yellowstone. That's going to be medicine that will help all the visitors figure out how to make meaning out of their lives, especially in the midst of a climate crisis. And I'm also really glad to hear that hairdos have been a thing, that all the way back in time, I've always been concerned about my hair, and that it was a thing back then too. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you so much, Dr.
Hair gel.
Yeah, there you go. So now we're gonna hear some from Jason, and I really am excited to hear about your work, because I know last week I was talking to a group in Menominee, Minneconnican, who are getting ready to receive buffalo from Yellowstone. And I'm telling you, they are acting like they are preparing for long lost relatives. And they are so proud, and the work that you do to ensure that our buffalo return to all the different homelands is so important. But I want to say, though, that I was in South Dakota at Yankton Reservation yesterday, and I was in a restaurant that, they sell health remedies, some different kinds of healing herbs, and it's a restaurant, but they didn't have buffalo burgers. And I said, how come? You're in the middle of Yankton Reservation. How come you don't have buffalo burgers? And the woman said, well, we only serve food that is certified by USDA. So I had a whole thing I wanted to say, but I was too hungry, and I just said, we'll pass on some names where you can buy some buffalo, USDA buffalo meat to serve. Jason?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and I want to say thanks to Wes and good friend Shane for their presentations and comments around indigenizing Yellowstone. Go ahead and bring up my first slide, and I want to, you mentioned USDA and the effort to make buffalo more available. Buffalo meat is the highest in protein, highest in minerals and vitamins, and lowest in fat and cholesterol than almost any other meat. The getting that buffalo back into our diet is a priority for many tribes. There's 76 member tribes of the Intertribal Buffalo Council. I'm on the board of ITBC, and we've worked to ensure that we can get that animal restored for cultural and spiritual purposes. I work as a tribal buffalo program manager for the National Wildlife Federation's Tribal Partnerships Program, and we've been able to build resolution-based agreements with both tribes here at Wind River to build our programs collaboratively and simultaneously. We have the opportunity to do something a little bit different here at Wind River because of our land base, as Wes had mentioned, that we have the opportunity to really set precedent for what management of of buffalo is supposed to look like. And our partnership with Yellowstone, partnership with other tribes, has been a very important partnership and collaboration. If we think about our worldviews, we as Indigenous people, we're very good observers. We were scientists, and we knew how things worked based on what we observed in the natural world. And what we came to understand, and what I've come to understand, is that we thought cyclically. And this medicine wheel thinking, this medicine wheel philosophy and belief. It's written in stone all around us. And what that is really a way of looking at the world that is guided by the cosmos, the seasons, the circles of the planet, that, you know, how that ties to our foods and medicines. Today, we often say that our people were nomadic, but you know, that implies often that we are wandering aimlessly. If you look that term up, wandering aimlessly, we don't have a good definition for the way our people related with the land, the plants, the animals, the water, and how that translates to who we are as human beings, as stewards of the land. So our people, we utilized a large territory to go and gather foods and medicines in Yellowstone, to visit our relatives, the sheep eaters that lived in the park, the Great Plains where we would hunt, you know, the sage chicken, pronghorn antelope. And the way that we moved in our territories, the way that we related to the seasons and the cycles, you know, to greet the sun in the morning, to give thanks and to live in gratitude. You know, Lewis and Clark would have never survived as long as they did if gratitude and compassion and empathy wasn't a value that Native people and Indigenous people had on this continent. And we care as stewards about these places still today, despite the colonial efforts to remove us from our territory, to remove us from our foods, like the buffalo, to take our water, like the longest running court case in the history of Wyoming. Today, we are in an era of self-determination and making decisions to change our future for us. But we have to understand some of that past. And so go to the next slide, please. This is the Shoshone Treaty of 1863, roughly 44 million acres. And this is overlapped with the modern boundaries, or the roads and the state boundaries that we recognize today. This was 1863. Go to the next slide. Only 5 years later, our reservation was reduced to this in 1868. The next slide, there were subsequent losses of lands. The General Allotment Act opened up reservations for homesteading. So that big chunk out of the middle there is the Riverton Reclamation Project. Despite these imposed land use systems that were brought to us, like land privatization, money, you know, the idea of domestication, that progress tells us to fence out, fence in, plow over, pave over, plow up. These imposed land use systems really removed us from our land base. Despite this, our tribes took significant steps in conservation, and in 1938 established the Wilderness Roadless Area. The language of the Wilderness Act, 26 years later, contains much of the language that was written into the Wilderness Roadless Area, Wind River. This contains over 200 lakes, several hundred miles of rivers and streams, and is now identified by radio collar data that this is critical habitat for our ungulate species, our elk, our predators like grizzly bears. You know, the successful wildlife management and restoration of Wind River was made in part because of the trust responsibility of the Fish and Wildlife Service. My father was in a unique position as a biologist for Fish and Wildlife Service, but also a tribal member, working on behalf of the tribes to protect fisheries and wildlife on the reservation. Go ahead to the next slide, please. The Shoshone people, we called ourselves the buffalo eaters, the Wichandika. And for 131 years, we didn't have access to buffalo in our lives. Buffalo is central to the belief systems, the ceremonies, the spiritual belief systems of both the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes here at Wind River. By bringing this animal back, it brings us much much hope for the future. This is food sovereignty. This is self-determination in action. And this is exercising our right to hold the federal government accountable for the trust responsibility. The forced removal of this animal from the landscape, the near extermination of the buffalo, was directly tied to acquisition of those lands held by tribes. Go ahead and go to the next slide. In 2016, we brought the very first buffalo. The first 10 came from the Neil Smith Wildlife Refuge in Iowa. 2017, this calf was born in May, the very first calf born on a Wind River reservation for the Shoshone tribe. In October of this year, of this same year of 2017, we brought 10 more from the National Bison Range in Montana. In 2019, we brought 5 bulls from the Fort Peck tribes in a tribe-to-tribe agreement. Those are Yellowstone offspring. In October of last year, you heard Wes mention that we brought 20 plus animals from the Nature Conservancy in Missouri. This year, we've had 9 calves born. We have 73 plus buffalo for the Shoshone tribe, and then Arapaho tribe currently has 53. The resolution-based agreements that we were able to establish through the National Wildlife Federation has meant that we have been able to bring the resources to the tribes to make this a success. What will be even more of a success is when the tribes exercise our self-determination to change a priority in land use. Because you see, our reservation is divided into 92 grazing units. For the last 130 years, prioritized for cattle grazing. Despite the success of the tribes in restoring and managing the ungulate species, pronghorn antelope and bighorn sheep were extirpated prior to 1984. We now have thousands. We had wildlife management predicted, and my father's work predicted, that if we managed our wildlife species, that populations would grow to a level that we would be able to sustain ourselves with those traditional foods in the way that we always have. Buffalo was the only one missing. Bison, Bojan, Hanachak, Heathenon. The way that we refer to this animal highlights our respect. And if we have the opportunity to manage these animals the way that the one above intended, today we call that as wildlife. To move away from treating them like livestock, to in fact restore them for their ecological integrity as a keystone species on the landscape will mean that we heal the land. As we build the population, we'll be able to hunt them, we'll be able to eat them again, feed ourselves, to in turn feed and heal ourselves, return them to our ceremonies, return them with our young people. Go ahead and go to the next slide. In the last couple of weeks, we've had over 800 kids, tribal youth, out here to see the buffalo. Go ahead and go to the next slide. What happens when our youth see and make eye contact with these buffalo? Something very special happens. These people, these youth of our reservation have an understanding about maybe the tie that our grandmas and grandpas had to this animal, and maybe the belief that we have something to look forward for in our future. This buffalo has always been our education. It's been missing from our lives for a great deal of time, but actually a small window of time when you think about the millennia that we've been on this continent with these animals. Many people don't know that we have 4 extinct species of bison: latifrons, antiquus, priscus, and occidentalis. That bison today that we see in this photo, the plains bison, the wood bison in the north, these species are very important on this landscape. We have to begin to shift our paradigm to understand how important they are on the landscape, how important they are for the future, for the youth of our reservation, who will now never have to know what it's like to not have buffalo. And so I think I've got another slide in there. No, I do not. And so there's a lot of federal effort. We know that the Department of Interior, the USDA with key positions can help us, that there are opportunities legislatively to bring more dollars to assist us in this trust responsibility effort. And so I'm very glad to share this panel with my colleagues today. And I'm very appreciative of the invitation to share with Native Organizers Alliance and all of you out there. Thank you, Judith.
Well, Shane, you know, is talking about such important, detailed work for how it is that we are able to restore the spiritual and the physical sustenance that buffalo bring to our peoples, our many tribes. And it is an inspiration to understand and for people to be very well aware that the federal government policies from the beginning of time have been to try to sever our ties to land, to culture, and to language. But they haven't succeeded. And although the Shoshone tribe, there was an interruption of 131 years, they are now helping, the work that they are doing, they're helping to reestablish buffaloes, the spiritual and the sustenance of buffaloes, reestablish that into our ecosystems, and helping to restore and return buffalo to tribes all over the country. And there was a question in the that one of the participants put into the chat. And the question was, how optimistic are we about indigenizing the national parks? Since Chuck Sams, a member of the Matilla tribe, is the director of the National Park Service. Well, I'd like to kind of flip the script on that question, because it is important to have representation. Having Secretary Holland be the head of Department of the Interior was a struggle. We struggled, we mobilized the grassroots and the tribal leaders to advocate to the transition team to nominate her. They wanted Udall, but the grassroots spoke, the tribal leadership spoke, and that representation of Deb and Chuck in these positions is very important because they can help to guide a process. But the only changes that can come about are ones that we are working, as Jason described, at the tribal level, at the grassroots level. We have to do the work to make the changes, to show through our practice that it is possible, it is necessary, and that they must find the ways for us to achieve the goal of indigenizing parks, returning buffalo into our ecosystem. Everything that we're doing in these areas on the ground at the tribal level and at the grassroots level is what makes it possible for Chuck and Deb to do the kind of work that they can to make some headway and structural reforms that will again reestablish our rights, inherent moral and legal rights to be caretakers of Mother Earth. So I want to ask the panel, first of all, can you give us just, I know that somebody asked in the questions how many oil wells there were that have been drilled at Yellowstone, but can you give us a status of the current efforts to indigenize Yellowstone Park?
You know, the work that we're doing with the GYC, Judith, and Shane mentioned some of this, working with Cam Shawley, the superintendent at the park. He's really trying to meet tribes halfway on the concerns that we have about reconnecting. There's still tribes with hunting rights in the park. There's still tribes with gathering rights. There's medicines and foods and other things that we still want to acquire in the park. And think with climate change coming, tribes are going to be major players in all of this, but it's up to us to make sure that we, number one, understand our governance. Number two, get the ability to be able to make our governance work. In the Western United States, well, all over, in the Western United States, tribes have senior rights to water. I think that's going to give tribes political and economic clout that they never ever realized, because we're going to be major players in these major basins of the Western United States. But at the same time, we also have to, like I mentioned earlier, we have to have codes, policies, laws, standards, regulations that back up our culture and our tradition while using scientific and technical data to do that. So me, I'm very optimistic. We've got an indigenous perspective within DOI right now. We got to move on that. We got to take advantage of that, because that could be gone. But I think as tribes, we're waking up. We're understanding what governance means. So me, I feel good about our future and what we're going to do to help restore our areas to the parks, because, you know, I think there's over 400 national parks. You know, all those parks are sacred sites to Indian people. And so that's very important for us to be able to have participation in that.
I was just gonna chime in and add that, you know, there's efforts in co-management of federal lands that are off reservation. And so if we're indigenizing Yellowstone, I think we need to have opportunities to not only make decisions on things like buffalo conservation or bison conservation, to ensure that we're getting more live animals out of the park to help supplement and improve the heterogeneity of our tribal populations and other conservation herds. There's also an opportunity to really tell our own story. And Wes talked about those tribes that have those ties. We need to be able to be in the park, if our tribes want to tell the stories that we want to tell. That, you know, Dr. Doyle mentioned some of those place names that are in the park. To be able to better describe and give those visitors a better experience when they come to the park, so that they have a more diverse understanding about the history, the thousands of years of history that we as tribes have to that area, that region. So I think we can really help in making conservation decisions for species like predators as well as bison, but be able to tell our own stories from inside the park. Very important, I think, for helping the greater public understand. You know, with greater understanding comes better acceptance. And we know that this country has done a very poor job at educating people about our history. Well, we have to be the ones to do that. And I think, you know, the legislation like the Montana Indian Ed for All bill, Wyoming's bill to help educate non-native people, students, youth about our history is going to help our future. So telling our own stories and helping in conservation.
So we have a couple of questions about what is the status of the relationships between the National Park Service and the tribal governments at this point? What are the goals of this intertribal gathering that will be happening on Wind River between June 1st and 3rd? And lastly, how do people go to the park and be responsible tourists? That was a phrase from the question. How to be a responsible tourist at Yellowstone and other national parks? So what is the
One of the
status
things
of
that,
tribal relationships, maybe to start with?
well, one of the things, just to reflect on your previous question, one of the things that the superintendent at Yellowstone is talking about is having an interpretive center at the park, where those 49 tribes can have a place where people can go hook up to a tribe and find out their history, those 49 tribes. And, you know, like with the NGOs that, you know, I'm working with the Greater Yellowstone Coalition, Jason's working with National Wildlife Federation, but I think NGOs are also starting to understand that tribes have a very unique legal and political relationship with the United States that nobody else has. And it's really important for tribes to be in the efforts, in the mix, in the discussion, because as tribes, we can do things that other governments cannot do. So I really think that's an important part of helping to re-indigenize, to get more voice and inclusion in the parks of this country.
So I'm wondering, in a perfect world, if we were to create a model for how to ensure did you say over 400 national parks, Wes?
Yeah,
What would be the guidelines of the model for how to indigenize all national parks in a perfect world?
well, conservation's the bottom line for all of us. How do we take care of you and you take care of us? And I was just really encouraged this past few months when I hear California is now working with the tribes to reinstitute their burning management, indigenous burning management practices that they used to have to stop all of these massive fires that we see now that are destroying homes and resources. So I think that's really going to be an effort from the National Park and the Forest Service. Right now, there's the Tribal Forest Protection Act in place that allows tribes to enter into agreements with Forest Service on co-managing some of these lands that we're adjacent to. Water quality, watershed management, economics are part of that act. So I really think there's efforts underway to try to include tribes, but as I keep mentioning, I always say tribes have to really make that happen. They have to step up and speak up for our rights, our resources, our treaties, and the inclusion that we want to have to manage and protect them.
Dr. Doyle, Jason?
Well, Jason,
Well, I would, many people don't know how to work with tribes. And so I think everything is going to begin with relationships, that you have to step outside of your comfort zone to go to these places, go to the people that are doing the work, and visit a social celebration, go to a powwow, do a little bit of homework about how or what the history is of the people in your area. We too often hear about land acknowledgements, and you're going to hear more and more about people talking about land back. Now, land back doesn't mean that everybody has to move off. It just means that there's an acknowledgement that these lands are the historical territories of the 574 federally recognized tribes and more. That the history of this country has really worked to eradicate our existence unsuccessfully, as you've heard today. We are still here. We are still carrying sovereignty, self-determination, and we have a lot to provide to the general society about how to relate to our food, our water, where our medicines come from, the connection to our relatives that we refer to as the four-leggeds, the winged ones, the ones that swim, those that crawl above and below the ground. We have to establish these relationships first in order to understand more about these philosophies and these belief ways. So that's how I would consider that. So thank you again for the time today.
Dr. Doyle?
I just concur, with Jason. We have a lot to learn. Native people have a lot to offer, and it's time for us to start playing bigger roles. If we have to pass legislation to make that a reality, we can do that. There's some that's supposed to be introduced here in June, a Native American Heritage Act. And so that's going to, hopefully, if that's introduced and passed, it will give tribal governments a much greater say in public lands. So there are opportunities on the horizon, and this is just one small step. But like they say, it's a giant step for, this process.
And I would add that we really need some strong advocacy and resources. We need philanthropy to step into this political moment, understanding that our tribes need resources in order to play our role. We want to be at the table, but we've got to be at the table with the kind of resources that provide for the technological basis for being co-managers. We also need conservationist groups to recognize that their work is good and we appreciate it, but it will have more power and impact if they are in close, authentic relationships, as Jason was saying, with the tribes of the area. And I want to applaud the Greater Yellowstone Conservation Coalition. Did I get that right?
Greater Yellowstone Coalition.
Yes, for stepping up and hiring Wes Martell to do the outreach, because as someone pointed out in the questions section, the chat section, there's only 27 tribes on the National Park Service listing of tribes that have ancestral relationships with the pack. But I think hiring someone like Wes to do the outreach, to bring tribes together, to help facilitate the conversations that we need to have in Indian country, these conservationist groups have to provide resources as well, and advocacy, and ensuring that we are a part of any kind of discourse about the future, as well as the past, but especially about the future of these packs. I have often thought about the fact that there are these gift centers, in the entrances to the pack, and there are many handbooks that are given out about the pack with very little about where this land, what this land was before the
Yep.
pack was created. And I heard, and someone asked a question about whether or not Native organizers alliances in relationship with people in these various departments. Well, Indian country is a small place. All of us on this webinar know somebody who's in the administration, in the Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, in DOI, in Ag, in Energy, because the Biden administration responded to the Native vote in 2020. They made the largest number of appointments of Native people ever in history. And so the way that this process is unfolding is unique to this political moment, that yes, Chuck Sams will be at the intertribal gathering June 1st through the 3rd at Wind River. He's there because of the grassroots organizing and the tribal kind of stepping in and leaning into being sovereign. He's coming because we are doing the work on the ground. But I think in many, many ways, people have been talking about in the chat that there's different struggles all over the country. Yellowstone is a model and an example of the direction where we want to go in. But the main thing is really connecting to tribal leaderships in your area and beginning to build alliances that can pressure the federal government to do what they need to do to ensure that statue is taken down, I think in Michigan. And I think it's a statue of, who is it a statue of? One of the military leaders that helped lead massacres. So do you all have some advice for people who are working in their own areas to indigenize the public parks in their areas?
Well, I think it all boils back. I always emphasize governance. What is our resources? What is our land base? What is our water? What does our treaty say? And if we have a constitution, what does that say? And what is our council and our tribal leaders doing to move a conservation agenda that not only recognizes our heritage and our spirituality, but also creates some jobs, also strengthens our families and communities, strengthens our sovereignty, allows us to fit into our regions based on how we want to grow and how we want to progress. At Wind River, we're very lucky. We have 2.5 million acres of land. We have we have water, we have resources. I think we got to start growing our own food. We got to take care of ourselves based on how our families and communities feel strengthened. And I've had the opportunity, just like you, Judith, to travel to a lot of areas and meet with a lot of other tribes and elders and tribal leaders and communities. We all want the same thing. And at Wind River, we're positioning ourselves to do that, to exercise our sovereignty wisely, to take advantage of our treaty and that the unique government to government relationship. How do we use that to strengthen ourselves and our families and communities?
Mhm. So are there last words that Dr. Doyle or Jason have for the audience?
I would just add that all federal agencies have trust responsibility to tribes, but we have very few examples of where that's upheld. And so if you work for a federal agency, if you work for a state agency, there should be a government to government relationship with the tribes in your region, in your area. And if there isn't one, then take those steps to develop that relationship that there is.
Mhm.
Hire Native people to bring that perspective. Create training programs for the tribes in your area so that we can foster our young people into these natural resource, biology, ecology, environmental science related fields, so that they can not only provide the technical know-how, but also bring that indigeneity that's going to be very important for those agencies to really uphold that trust responsibility. Conservation overlaps very well with traditional ecological knowledge. That's because both are based in the understanding of the interconnectedness, the interrelatedness of organisms and how everything is tied together, that we are just merely stewards, caretakers here for a very short time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Doyle, any parting shots before we close out?
Well said. Just like to thank my colleagues for their insight and wisdom. And, I think for those folks who are interested in getting their tribes more integrated into the decision-making and everything with parks, with national parks that are located near your population of your native people or on your historic homelands, a lot of times tribal historic preservation officers don't have the capacity to do all those things. So you need to kind of take the lead on that, and then, form a little group, get some like-minded tribal members, and, you can make headway that way, and then, have your tribe support you in that way. And that way we can kind of, in our own way, make progress without having to always lean on the tribe for everything.
Mhm, mhm. Well, we've come to an end. The recording of this webinar and the Q&A will be available to all over 1,000 people who registered for the RSVP'd for this webinar. We're very thankful that so many were able to take the time to learn more about how the work is proceeding to indigenize Yellowstone. But I would end with this, that the starting point for protecting Mother Earth, responding to the climate crisis, indigenizing the national parks and public lands, returning public lands into tribal management and caretaking, has to be just utilizing an indigenous framework, that all things are related, that we are all in relationship, and that we are walking in a time continuum, which is bringing the past and the future together in the present. So how we walk in the present is critical. And each of us, Native and non-Native, tribal leaders, environmental justice leaders, we all have roles to play, but in the final analysis, it has to be grounded in reciprocity, that we all not only are related, but must share and work together in order to protect Mother Earth. So thank you so much, Shane and Wes and Dr. Doyle. We really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so
Everybody
much.
be safe.
Thank you very much.